Record. All right, good afternoon, MOCA friends. I'm Neil Wu Gibbs, Chief of Staff at the Museum of Chinese in America. We hope you and your families are remaining safe and healthy during these challenging times. This year's Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month is unlikely any other in recent memory. As a social history museum for more than 40 years, MOCA has sought to share the fact that these recent terrifying incidents reflect an uglier fundamental history of systemic racism and anti-Asian bigotry in America. Yet, history has always given us stories of how individuals have resisted, discovered their agency, find their voice, spoken up, and taken actions against fear and hate. MOCA hopes that the stories told through its virtual programming for AAPI Heritage Month will inspire people to awaken the storyteller in all of us, so that in response to the latest wave of anti-AAPI violence, we can tear down hate by lifting up others through our stories of remembrance and resilience. This evening, MOCA is honored to continue our AAPI Heritage Month programming representing our next featured experts. Soo Lon Moy, immediate past chair, president of the Chinese American Museum of Chicago, and Andrea Stamm, chair of collections and research, a participating organization of MOCA's recent special exhibition gathering, collecting and documenting Chinese American history. Ms. Moy, chair of the exhibition committee, and Ms. Stamm, chair of collections and research, will be in conversation with Andrew Rebatta, MOCA's associate curator, about the role of CAMOC in preserving the history of the Chinese community in Chicago, as well as two featured artifacts, Lama Temple Incense from the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, A Century of Progress, and a rare 1942 adoption paper from a local Chinatown family. Furthermore, during AAPI Heritage Month, the museum welcomes people to submit their stories, artwork, photos, videos, raw footage, recording of audios or natural sound, ephemera, rally posters, handmade signs, social media image, bystander intervention materials, or t-shirts, merchandise used in fundraising campaign for AAPI causes. These submissions will be considered for inclusion in an upcoming MOCA exhibition. For more information or to submit your story, email MOCA at oneword@mocanyc.org or visit www.mocanyc.org/get involved. Submissions will be accepted until May 21st, 2021. If you enjoy this public program, we hope you will consider making a gift to become part of a continuing lifeline for MOCA. No amount is too little, and we greatly appreciate your generosity. Your contribution helps sustain our beloved institution and supports the creation of new online programming that will bring comfort and inspiration to more communities. Lastly, this program is brought to you by MOCA friends and partners, including Bloomberg Philanthropies. This program is also supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Without further ado, I will let our moderator, Andrew, to introduce our guest speaker, Soo Lon and Andrea. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neil, for that great introduction. And I'll just continue with it. Well, thank you everyone for joining this evening, afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm here with Soo Lon Moy and Andrea Stamm, both very important. They say they're volunteers at the CAMOC, but they are so much more, and they put so much more time in it than you could ever imagine. And so just to briefly describe how the program will unfold, Soo Lon and Andrea will begin with a sort of brief history of Chicago's Chinatown, go into the building that the museum is currently located inside, and then enter into a discussion about the two objects that they will be discussing in depth with everyone. As Neil mentioned, one is a incense from the Lama Temple that was given out or sold at the Chinese Pavilion and in the 1933 World's Fair, and also an adoption document that was actually received by the museum from someone who's just, across the street. So I think that's a great story that, we at MOCA love hearing, and we love that sort of relationship you have with your community there. And so we're just really excited to hear more about it. I believe Soo Lon will be starting things off. So Soo Lon, when you're ready.
Thank you, Andrew and Neil. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Soo Lon Moy, and I will talk about the first slide. Neil, do you have that, please? Okay, this is a picture of the second current Chinatown at the corner of Cermak and Wentworth. This picture is a parade, probably a double 10 parade, as you see American flags and also the Chinese Republican flag. So as you can see, they're marching, and many of the Chinese are in the US military uniform. And in the old days, many of our Chinese immigrants served in the armed forces as well as now. So at the beginning when of the Chinatown, it was actually established not at this site, but at a different location in the downtown area at Clark and Van Buren. And so because of the anti-Chinese violence in the West Coast, that was really hard and difficult for the Chinese people. So around early 1870s, I'm sorry, a gentleman by the name of Moy Chow Dung, he moved to Chicago, and where he found a more accepting environment. So he established the original Chinatown at Clark and Van Buren in this downtown area. He encouraged relatives and friends in San Francisco and Guangdong to come to Chicago. So by 1890, the census recorded over 500 Chinese living in Chicago. By 1911, there were over 1,800 Chinese. Due to construction and rising rents and organization disharmony, the Online Merchants Association decided to move to Cermak and Wentworth in 1912. Since there were, so that's where we have been at this site until now, where we celebrated the centennial back in 2012. Okay, next slide, please.
Hi, this is Andrea. My first slide that I will be introducing is the Ling Long Museum slide. This is a picture of the inside of the first Chinese museum in Chicago's Chinatown. It was one room, and it looks like it might not be that large, but it was actually very large. It was opened just in time for the Century of Progress World Fair in 1933. There were 23 dioramas, which you can see on the left and the right. And these dioramas depicted Chinese culture and customs. They also, on the top, you can see funeral and wedding procession figures. In the back, the light is in the way, but there was a massive Guan Yin painting. And on top of that, she was wearing a crown. That's also, you can see a little bit of the crown there, but it's obscured. So we after the fire, well, just as the fire happened, we were cleaning the 23 dioramas to go into storage. So we actually lost 22 of them. Only one survived, the one that was on display on the second floor. And so the crown survived, and what you can't see here, there's some hey boys that survived. That's all that survived from the fire from this museum. The dioramas were organized and produced by Cantonese artist Watson Lim, who lived from 1894 to 1935, and he had a lot of help from eminent Chinese scholars. Next slide. Soo Lon, you have to unmute.
Sorry. Okay, this is the Chinatown Gateway. So in 1971, George Chung, a Chinatown community leader who worked for the city's Department of Human Resources, along with other community leaders, conceived the idea of having a gateway to Chinatown. Construction began in 1974 at the cost of $62,000, supported by the Taiwanese government, city government, and the Chinese community. The gateway was designed by a Chinese architect, Peter Feng. As with most Chinatowns all over the world, there's always a gateway or some kind of marking leading to the Chinatown. Next slide. Okay, here on the left, that's our iconic Onlung Merchants Building, which is now renamed as Puitak Center. So it has a very interesting history because when Chinatown was moved from the Chicago downtown area to Cermak and Wentworth, they wanted to build an iconic building to recognize it as the Onlung building, indicating Chinatown. So, so what happened is there were no Chinese architects at that time in the 1920s. So Norwegian architects of Michelson and Ronstadt were hired to commission the Onlung building. They had no knowledge of Chinese architects and did a crash course from books written by a German architect who lived in China for 10 years. And so this is the result of their attempt, which turned out very beautifully. So the Onlung Merchants Building was dedicated in 1928, and it's the only building in Chinatown that has the preservation status. Okay, and on top, Chinatown Square, that was developed in the 1980s for the expansion of Chinatown. It's just a block from the old Chinatown. And then on the bottom, you could see a beautiful pagoda at the Pingtown Park. That was named after a very prominent Chinese business leader from Chinatown. So what happened was in the 1960s, the Park District facility, recreation center, the field house that was demolished because of the construction of the highway. And so Chinatown had lost green space and field houses for the recreation use for over 2 generations. So finally, the city, allowed us to build Pingtown Park, which is really beautiful. It's very popular park to view and to use. Along with that, there's another field house that was built named Len Louis Field House, again, in memory of another wonderful Chinatown leader. And they serve the Chinatown and surrounding neighborhood area. Next slide, please.
Okay, this is on the left side, this is our earliest picture that we have of our museum building with Raymond Lee and his cousin Alan Lee in front of the Kwang Yik building around 1950. This was a family enterprise. It was actually a warehouse and a retail grocery store that the cousins were working inside of when they came from China. And the donor of our museum is Raymond Lee. He's the man on the right. He actually lived in this building on the 3rd floor, and in the basement he made tofu and grew bean sprouts for sale in the retail store. And so you can see just a little bit on the left side of that picture, the Kwang Yik and Company and the 238, the number on the window. So that's the earliest picture that we have. On the right is the picture of the whole building before the museum actually started. And you can see it's 3 stories tall. Actually, it's 4 stories tall plus a basement. And we're very fortunate that we were able to get this because our donor, Raymond Lee, decided it was time. He was a successful businessman in Chicago's Chinatown. He wanted to give back to the community. So he made a challenge to us. He said, if we open within a year, he will donate the building to the museum. We will not have to pay for it. So we were the most highly motivated crew you have ever seen in Chicago to make sure we could have an opening within a year of the contract that was signed. And we actually renovated floor by floor. So we were only 2 stories renovated, the 1st and 2nd, when the fire happened in 2008. So that's the beginning of the museum building. Next slide, please.
Okay, this is a wonderful picture of our grand opening in May of 2005. So after the first renovation, you could see that there were many dignitaries, government officials that came, and as well as community leaders and museum members who came to help us celebrate, as well as performers from Century School, Lion Dance. The usual celebratory program took place. And that was at the, in 2005. Next slide, please.
Soo Lon,
Also, I forgot to mention that when we reopened, we had our first exhibition, which was called Paper Sons, which many of our community know the terms. Okay, so this is on the left is the current picture of our building right now, and the 2 beautiful granite lions were gifted to the Chinatown community from the People's Republic of China's Overseas Department to celebrate Chinatown's centennial back in 2012. Then the second picture that was in 2012, its new phase after the 2nd renovation after our museum fire. Next slide, please. Okay, fire at the museum on September 19. That was really devastating in the year 2008. So it was really devastating for us to see that, heartbreaking, and as well as for MOCA when you had the fire at your storage building. So at that time, a group of volunteers were on the 3rd floor packing artifacts to be moved to the warehouse as renovation began on the 3rd floor storage area. They were on lunch break when the fire broke out. It took the fire department more than 24 hours to control the fire. Then we were allowed into the building. Although we lost a good portion of our collections, but thankfully no one was hurt. We lost about 2/3 of our beautiful turn of the century Chinese garments. Next slide, please.
okay, this is Andrea again. Trying to figure out how you can see me. The light is changing where I'm staying right now. I think you can see what this looks like. This third floor was where all the collections were being housed before we had any kind of a renovation on the third floor. You can see at this point total devastation. You can see a lot of charred wood on the bottom. It was inside a wooden structure. The floors were wood. Obviously, the outside was made out of brick, but you can see we had this was what you can see here was a total loss of everything that was there on this third floor, our collections. We were only very, very lucky that for some reason I had decided that things that were archival in nature should not be on the third floor. They should be in a special locked area, which happened to be on the first floor. And so I had control of that. And so all of our archival materials did not get destroyed. None of them got destroyed in the fire. It was just miraculous. You know, we were very lucky. Our original documents, paper things mostly. So that was one blessing that came of this, that's for sure. Next slide, please. Okay, these two slides are also obviously from the fire. On the left, this is Scott DeMel, who is from the Field Museum, head of anthropology at that point. And we had so many wonderful volunteers from the community when the fire happened. Almost all of the major museums in Chicago came and helped the morning after the fire, as well as so many smaller institutions from ethnic museums that were part of the recently convened Chicago Cultural Alliance. And we got so much help from all of those members. It was absolutely fantastic. So there's Scott looking through debris, trying to figure out what is it could we save from this on the left. That was on the second floor. Both of these pictures are on the second floor. The one on the left that I'm talking about is also on the right, on the right part, all the way to the right. All the way to the right on the second picture. Well, anyway, that's where all that debris was. You can see on the picture on the second floor, if you look up to the ceiling, there's holes in the ceilings where the fire on the third floor and the water, which must have been very heavy, went through from the third floor to the second floor and drenched everything, because really there's no reason for the second floor to have been wet. It didn't have the fire itself. This is just water damage. So it was extensive water damage. You can see that there's some exhibit cases there, which did not do very well when all the water came down from the ceiling. So we had quite a bit of, many of our objects that were on display were not watertight exhibit cases. So that's something that we learned there. I think that's all I really need to say about that. Thank you. The next slides, you can see, we just gave you one picture of a piece of a garment. This is a robe, a Chinese robe that got burned, but you could see enough of it to survive, that survived, so you could see what it might have looked like before it got actually burned. We went and all of our garments and textiles were folded up very carefully and neatly and put into little crates, and we sent to a freeze-dry business. The damp, wet textiles actually were ruined because the dyes were not color fast. There was bleeding of the color. And we didn't really know that. Had we known it, we might have done something different from going to the freeze-dry. So we kept all these damaged textiles, and we decided we would use them for educational purposes, not for future display and exhibitions, except for our Fire at the Museum exhibit. On the right-hand side, you can see there we have a warehouse space that was kindly donated by one of our advisors. And we were able to put the objects that survived in boxes, even though they're not acid-free at that point, they are now, but at that point, just to dry the objects. So they were fairly well taken care of when we had to put things into the warehouse. On the bottom right, you can see this is the object triage on drying tables. We had no electricity. We borrowed a generator. We had some neighbors' electricity that we were able to borrow. We borrowed several fans for a few days, and all of this to facilitate drying. Each object was given a new numbered tag, and almost no mold occurred on the objects because we were faithfully changing the paper to keep things drying. Thank you. Next, please.
Okay, this is the rare document that we've been talking about. And it was dated 1942. The Yi family who lived across the street from us, they didn't even know of its existence until their mom died in 2007. So this certificate was stored in a duffel bag under the bed, along with other Chinese documents. The daughter brought these documents to the museum since they didn't read Chinese. And Henry, the adoptee, immigrated to Chicago with his mother in 1951. With his father working long hours in the laundry, he helped cared for his 5 brothers and sisters. Henry also enlisted in the Army in 1962. And in 1965, he married a Hopi American Indian in San Jose. They had 4 children, and Henry died of a brain tumor in 1977 at the young age of 38. It was very common practice for families to adopt children due to various reasons. One would be to ensure family continuity. So in Chinese culture, we always want a male heir to carry on the family name. So by having a male heir, it also provides companionship and financial support in old age, and also help with farming if in the rural area. My own father-in-law, he at the age of 5, he was adopted into a family in 1923 because that family had only 1 girl and they needed a male heir to help with the farming. And then my father-in-law's family, they were very poor. They that year there was really bad harvest and drought and famine, and so they had other children. So they adopted off the youngest one first, and then the next one was my father-in-law, and they kept the older one because he can help with the farming labor. Next slide, please.
Oh, no, wait. No, go back, please. Thank you. We didn't talk about the picture on the right. We wanted to make sure, this is the only picture that I could find of the adoption document before the fire, and it was in the frame and on exhibit when we took this picture. And the staff at the Field Museum were quite amazing. They were able to restore just about everything from the original, what they couldn't restore, what came out in all of the washings. There's if you zero in towards 2/3 of the way down, Neil, on the right-hand picture, there's some redness there. There's a red chop there. Yes, that chop, that rectangular chop, that's the only thing that seemed to have disappeared when the Field Museum did the restoration. So we feel that we're very, very lucky. Soo Lon, did you mention the 2 thumbprints?
Yes. Okay. So because the parents were illiterate, and so they used their fingerprints as instead of the signature.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Next. Okay, this is a picture of the staff from the Field Museum who were trying to restore the adoption document. And when the fire occurred, the water and ashes came down from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor. And the picture was in a plexiglass frame, and the original paper, which is handmade Asian Chinese paper, stuck to the plexiglass. So they had a very complicated procedure to try and restore the document. And they did the most amazing, wonderful job. I never could have believed they could have restored it the way they did. And we had a report from the Field Museum staff who were doing the restoration that it took 35 hours of conservation treatment to bring it back to what you saw on the left-hand side in the previous slide. So we were just delighted that they were able to do so much. It was wonderful. Thank them. Next slide, please. I think finally now we're getting to the second object that we wanted to talk about, which happens to be the incense from the Chinese Lama Temple. Basically, there's so much to say about the Chinese participation in the 2 World's Fairs, the 1893 World Columbian Exposition and the 1933-34 Century of Progress. The Lama Temple was actually the iconic image of Chinese participation. And what I found interesting when we were asked to come up with an object, you'll see it later on in this presentation, the incense, the box of incense that was sold at the Lama Temple. That's what I chose, and we'll get to that soon. But the Lama Temple itself, on the left side, this is pictures from the Chinese merchant C.P. Chan, who really was responsible for much of the success of the Century of Progress Chinese participation. And he's in the center of that left picture, and behind him is the Lama Temple in this actual photograph from 1933. The picture on the right is in color, and it's from actually a postcard. And it really was a beautiful, beautiful building. I think I'll talk a little bit, I can tell you a little bit about it now. The Lama Temple was brought to Chicago by Dr. Sven Hedin. He was a famous Swedish explorer and a noted sinologist. It was financed by Swedish-American industrialist Vincent Bendix. It was an exact replica of a 1767 imperial temple in Jehol, which I know I'm mispronouncing, Jehol, the summer residence of the Emperor Qianlong. It consisted of 28,000 pieces of wood, which were cut and carved in China and shipped to Chicago. And each piece had a number on it. And so when it came to Chicago, nobody in America could figure out how to reassemble the pieces because they didn't understand the numbering system. So they had to wait to bring over a specialist from China to be able to interpret how you would reassemble 28,000 pieces of wood. The Lama Temple itself was 70 feet square, 60 feet high, had 32 doors, 48 windows, and had gold-plated copper shingles. That's why it was also called the Golden Temple of Jehol from the roof. Okay, we can move to the next slide. These are 2 interior shots of the Lama Temple. There were so many pieces of various statues and carpets and carvings that there actually is a publication only in black and white of a lot of the objects that were inside this temple. So we thought it would be good for you to see the color. There also, the inside of the roof was absolutely spectacular. If you could have seen that, we only have black and white picture of that. And we didn't think that would add that much because it wasn't in color. On the right, we have the Lama priest, the Buddhist Lama priest praying. And this is, I guess this picture was very posed because you can see people in the background who are not Chinese. who are looking on as they have some kind of an event there inside the Lama Temple. But you can see how in this actual photograph here, the detail of some of the objects was quite remarkable. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here is the Lama Temple incense cover that I've been talking about. It was sold in front of the temple for 2 years because the Century of Progress lasted for 2 years. And it really is quite a very fanciful cover. We have actually more than one version of the Lama incense. We have smaller size and a larger size. And I'm going to show you what inside. I'm going to pick up this piece of paper and show you. You can see me holding up. This is what the incense looks like inside the box. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 24 pieces inside in 3 different colors. And so it really, the Lama Temple, you could see it from air, you could see it from the sky ride, you could see it from a lot of different places, the Lama Temple. And the incense is just a symbol of the temple. On the right, you can see the incense sellers in front of the incense burner. We're very fortunate to get this picture where these 2 young ladies, this is actually a picture from 1934. You can see that in front of the Chinese pavilion, because there were in the Century of Progress, the Chinese pavilion had many different activities. They actually had a beautiful, amazing piece, a jade sculpture, a jade pavilion that they made out of jade inside the building there. And that went to California and has since come back to Chicago, but not to our museum. It's massive, amazing piece of jade carving inside this building. And there were other wonderful exhibits, and there was food, and there were souvenirs for sale. And obviously incense was a good seller for this kind of affair. So that was good. We don't know the name of the 2 ladies. If someone were to tell us, we'd be happy to include their names. So I think that's it for that slide here. Soo Lon?
Yes, thank you, Andrea. Okay, this is a replica of the Lama Temple that we had in one of our exhibitions. So we had an exhibition on Chicago's 2 World Fairs in 2006. The first one, 1893 World Columbia Exposition, which was called White City because the building's columns were white staff, which was similar to plaster of Paris. So the Chinese presence was on the Midway theater, restaurant with American food and souvenir. And the second World Fair was in 1933 to 4, Century of Progress. And the Chinese participation was the 1934 Streets of Shanghai with Pagoda Gate, garden, restaurant, Chinese and American food, Lama Temple, Chinese artisans, theaters, sideshows, street scenes. So the Lama Temple was in 1933, began in 1933. So during the 2 World Fair, the Chinese government refused to participate to protest against the Chinese exclusion law. So both fairs were sponsored by local merchants in the Chicago area. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Soo Lon and Andrea for that presentation. Wow, just I have so many questions about each object. But I think our audience really got a good overview and some really great background. Just for everyone who's still tuning in, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function on the bottom sort of menu bar of the Zoom screen. And right now we have one question from Mitchell, and his question is, and Soo Lon or Andrea, feel free to chime in first, but how would you characterize Chicago's Chinatown today? Particularly population demographics, maybe businesses too.
Yeah, I can answer that, Andrew. Mitchell, the Chinatown nowadays is so different from our original Chinatown, where the immigrants were mostly from the Toisan, Canton area. Now it's the population is much more diverse, and everyone speaks Mandarin. And the businesses also have changed. We not only have Chinese restaurants, but also a few Japanese plus Korean and Thai restaurants too. So there are many changes, in the demographic of the Chinatown. It's much more vibrant now. When I first came to Chicago's Chinatown in the 1960s, if you went into a grocery store and you did not speak Toisan and you only spoke Cantonese, the grocery workers, they would not even bother taking care of you. But the story is very different nowadays. So it's not, probably before everyone know everyone else, because it's such a tightly knitted community. But now it has expanded to the maximum borders where they can expand to. So it's more population and diversity, and I see that as a good thing, a good growth.
I can just add that there's been some surveys of Chinatowns in the United States, and apparently most of them are not doing very well. They're shrinking, but Chicago's Chinatown is growing. It's the one exception in the United States of Chinatown. So that's something we can be proud about too.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question. My last visit to Chicago is maybe like 2 years ago, and I walked there from Pilsen, and I was just wondering, can you briefly describe what the surrounding neighborhoods are like, and even how those have been sort of changing over the years?
Just to the west of Chinatown is Pilsen, the Latino area in Chicago, with a lot of restaurants, and there's housing there too. A lot of people live there. And to the east is the highway, the expressway that came in, actually knocking down some of Chicago's Chinatown in that area. Was that in the 1970s, you said, Soo Lon, when that happened? Yeah. And just a little bit east of that is McCormick Place, the big convention center, which obviously wasn't there a long time ago. And to the south, there's more expressway, and that kind of stops the Chinatown from going to the south. Growing to the north was the railroad yard. And so when that was demolished, that's how we got to the square that Soo Lon talked about early on in the presentation, Chinatown Square. That's how we got that land for Chinatown. So we're kind of landlocked, actually. And it's the Chinese community is moving to the south a little bit in Bridgeport, where Mayor Daley used to live down there. And it's causing some difficulty between the neighbors. they're saying that the value of housing is going up because so many Chinese people are moving into Bridgeport. Well, that's a fact of life. Yeah, that's my 2 cents worth.
So I think the only expansion that's allowable is basically southwest, and many Chinese have moved to Bridgeport, to McKinley Park, and so further away from Chinatown.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because just like the sort of I guess impression I have, and I think is sort of noted amongst many sort of urbanists, is how segregated Chicago has been for so long. So it's very interesting to see, you know, a place like Chinatown expand. And one of the audience members, Mitchell, had a follow-up question as well. And it's, what do you think accounts for the growth of Chicago's Chinatown while so many others are shrinking?
Well, I think probably we are allowed to keep the buildings, the property, and because we're so landlocked and we don't have, you know, I don't see too many gentrification other than the Starbucks that opened up a few years ago. And now we have a new hotel that went up. And so that's, you know, in back of the old library. So that's about the only thing that we see, you know, at this point. And I think, you know, we maintain that. And then also, I have heard renters who complain that they never knew when housing was available for rent. And when they want to rent in Chinatown, because it's all advertised in the Chinese newspaper or by word of mouth. So.
Okay, and just to kind of switch gears a little bit, we have another question just about the sort of post-fire recovery, and you know, what has been, since the fire and since reopening in 2010, what has the momentum been like for collecting or sort of replenishing certain things that were lost in the collection? How has that process been?
I can speak to that, obviously. The museum has no budget for collections. I mean, we have a collections budget for supplies, but we do not purchase, we never have purchased any objects. And so we rely on donors to give us materials and objects and postcards and photographs and wonderful old documents like this adoption document, and garments and porcelains and whatever they feel they don't need anymore, we rely on that. And so that's how we have worked. So that means that we have gaps in our collection, and we have to live with that, because that's just the fact of life when you don't have a budget to acquire objects. We work as hard as we can now. What we learned from this was that you have to document things better than we had in the beginning. So we now take photographs of every object that comes in after the fire, so that we can tell, for example, when we had the fire, we had 3 abacuses. And in our past perfect database that describes everything, we hadn't made enough details in the description to know which abacus was which. So now we write greater details and we take pictures. And that's all in the database. So that really helps us with collections. We are still welcoming whatever, well, not whatever, but you know, it has to be in scope with our museum, but we are welcoming donations. We are very blessed that people are willing to give us materials from their family, the family history, and all of that. And I could talk for hours on this subject.
You know, what have collecting efforts been like the past year during the pandemic?
We haven't received a lot of materials in the last year. We were closed twice by the state government, so that was difficult. And as with any kind of museum, when we get a gift, it can be 1 piece or it can be 150 pieces. And so it just depends on what the person wants to donate to our museum. how much backlog we have of trying to process the materials that we are very fortunate to receive. So it takes time. It takes time.
And I just, I just have one last question before I start reading off more of the questions from our audience. But, has the nature of the donations, or has the nature of the donations kind of changed over the years since you started? I know you both started volunteering at the museum in 2004, and the neighborhood's changing around you. The Chinese population is becoming more diverse. You had this tragic fire. Has like the sort of engagement or the type of donation kind of evolved or changed?
I would say that it hasn't changed all that much. We're really at the mercy of the people who are cleaning out their houses or downsizing, or they've lost a beloved relative. When someone wants to donate an object to the museum, I always say, have you talked to your family? Is it okay with them? We want to make sure that when you donate something to us, that they have real title to it and they can sign over that title to us. And we also only take objects that we feel that we can preserve. If it's something that's in a terrible condition, we hate to take it because it would just fall apart while we are the custodian of it. And that doesn't make sense to me to keep that. So we're careful about what we say yes to, and it has to be within scope of our museum collection policy, which is a nice lengthy policy.
And Calvin Lee has a question. He wants to know what happened to the 28,000 pieces of the temple and why wasn't it preserved?
That's a very good question. After 1934, the Lama Temple was shipped to New York for the 1939 World's Fair in New York. And it stayed there for a few years. And then, as you recall, Sven Hedin was the person who really started this whole thing. He was a Swedish explorer and he wanted it in Sweden. So it managed to get shipped to Sweden after that in a lot of pieces. And there was a lot of legal wrangling in between all the people who thought they should have title to this particular building. And I think it even went to court. It was very messy, but the pieces stayed in Sweden, but they were missing a whole big chunk of the pieces. They were not in good condition at that point already. And the last estimate I saw from a newspaper article was that they only had 70% of the pieces in Sweden, and it was going to go into a museum just as pieces, not as a reconstructed Lama Temple. So that's, from what I know, what happened to it. It's still in Sweden. Parts of it.
Oh, wow.
Unassembled.
Unassembled. Oh man, I think it needs to come back.
It must have been incredible. I wish I had been alive back then. I really do.
We're approaching the end of the program, and I just want to ask maybe, unless any more questions come in, I want to address a question from Kat Leong, who wants to know, as like anti-Asian hate crimes, across the country have been, escalating and rising. What has Chicago been like? Because, typically even for me, I see a lot of West Coast incidents and a lot of Northeast incidents, but yeah.
Soo Lon?
Yeah, I think we were just talking about that recently also. It's so disheartening to see all these anti-Asian violence against, the Asian population in the East Coast and then also in the West Coast. As we did our recent exhibition, we found that there was a letter that was written by the Chinese Six Company in 1876 to the chief of police, asking for protection due to the violence
in San Francisco.
And asking for protection as violence. They were getting beaten up and on the street, and so that's more than 100 years later, and right now we're still facing the same problem. And so fortunately for Chicago, we have not had a rash of violence like that that's faced by the East and West Coast Asian Americans. But recently we had a person who drove his truck into a crowd, and a woman was pinned underneath it, and luckily she wasn't hurt, real bad. So it's just very disheartening. I think we really need to think of ways on how to prevent this, and how to educate the general public about the Chinese and Asian Americans, their contribution and challenges, that we have our history in the United States, and we are Americans also. And so we really need to learn how we can work together and do something about this. Yeah.
Soo Lon and Andrea, I guess maybe I have one last question for y'all, and that is, when I visited the museum a couple years ago, you had two volunteers, young women from China. I believe they were studying museum studies, or were interested in working at museums. Chinese students or foreign students are like amongst the largest group of all foreign students, and so I was just wondering, what are you kind of learning from your sort of exchange with some of the recent immigrants? And I know this is hard to describe over the past year, but how have conversations maybe evolved, as the community is becoming more diverse as well, in terms of who's the audience you're trying to reach, or different ways of reaching that audience.
So Andrea, do you want to talk about our prospective employee
We
as a
had
result of the volunteering?
Yes, we had a volunteer for about 2 years. She was getting her master's degree at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and she wanted to work in a museum. So she volunteered with us for about 2 years, and we were thrilled to have her. She was absolutely incredible. We wanted to keep her. We wanted to offer her a job, a paying job. And so her visa was expiring, so she had to go back to China. And so we went through the process of trying to get her to be able to come back to the US. She wanted to stay in the US. And she, we got permission. She went through and got permission to come back. And then we had that problem with the previous president, who said that we're going to cancel all these visas or put them on hold for a while. And so she has not been able to come back. But now that we have a different president, she should be able to come back. We're trying to get her to come back. She wants to come back, and she needs to get assigned visa approval through the embassy, and Beijing embassy hasn't yet started that. So she has to go to another country to get that, and then she'll come to Chicago and work for us again. She's absolutely exceptional. We have learned so much from her that it is just amazing. I can't wait for her to come back. The students are wonderful. They really are. And we've had quite a few different students in collections, and they're not all the same. They have different skills, and they all want to work in museums, which seems really interesting to me. I mean, how many people think about that? But apparently quite a few Chinese people.
It's great to hear it. And for, everybody out there, the Chinese American Museum in Chicago is an amazing place, and they thrive through volunteer work. So,
Yes.
you can reach them on their website for opportunities. Andrea and Soo Lon, and I think we'll be ending the program now, but I wanted to see if you had any final words or things you wanted to say to the listeners.
Well, this was a great opportunity for us to present the Chinese American Museum of Chicago to the world. And I thank you for attending and asking these questions. And this was really a wonderful process for us to be able to connect to a much broader audience. That's something we're always trying to do. So this is a great opportunity and we're very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, I think this is wonderful. Thank you for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to share with everyone. And if you have a chance, please come to Chicago and visit our museum. And as we always say, that education is very critical at this point to gain better cultural understanding.
Mhm.
That's
We need that
absolutely
more
right.
than ever, the better cultural understanding and tolerance of people that don't look like you and me. We need that very much. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for stating that, and you are doing that work, and I know the work you're doing is making a difference. So thank you for all of that, and thank you for participating today in this program series.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Okay, Neil, we'll be